our job is to work with elected officials, planning staff, transit staff, engineers, park staff, and think about the region as a whole and think about the transportation system within the region to prioritize through collaboration. Obviously, there's very limited transportation funding and our communities have a lot of different transportation needs. So how can we come together, have that conversation? How can we work together to best use that funding that benefits the majority of the people in our region, or as many people in the region as possible? So some of the other things that we do within our agency, we have the Ride NFRMPO program. We have, I believe Corey is on the line, our mobility manager. We also have a van pool program. So we do have some other things besides just straight up transportation planning. So let's start off with some introductions for people who are on the phone. And let's have everybody give their name, their title, and what agency they work for. And then we thought it would be interesting to start off with a question of what TDM means to you, and whether that's just the acronym or how it could fit in, or just when you think of TDM, what do you think of? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen really quickly so I can see who's doing what, and then I will call on people to introduce themselves. So, Bianca?
Hi there. Well done. You got my pronunciation right, too. That's impressive. Bianca Fisher. I'm the Executive Director of the Greeley Downtown Development Authority. I think, when I hear transportation demand management, to me, it just boils down to choices, transportation choices. I think about all of the options for multimodal transportation and how we can maximize efficiencies within those systems. So.
Great, thank you. Bill Becker.
Good afternoon, Bill Becker, Loveland Chamber of Commerce, but Fix North I-25 and the NCLA, and it's good to see some familiar faces.
Great. Corey.
Hi everyone, Corey Schmidt, Mobility Manager at the North Front Range NPO. And what TDM means to me, I think I'd echo what Bianca was saying about really giving people choices. I think we built our assumption that people need to drive everywhere to get it, to get where they need to go. And I think TDM is a way to kind of reframe the conversation a little bit and think about things more broadly and holistically.
Great. Derek?
Good morning. Good afternoon. Derek Jetta with the Downtown Development Authority. I'm the policy and program manager for the organization. TDM, I guess, kind of in the acronym, it's managing the demand of transportation. And I look at it from a downtown perspective, oftentimes is managing that demand, especially looking at all the different economies, nighttime economy, especially in Fort Collins and a university town as well. So.
And Evan.
Evan Wetland, Associate Director of Economic Development for Larimer County. Transportation demand management to me, is I'm interested in the aspect of how we're moving around the region and how we can make it easier for individuals to, get around the Northern Colorado environment.
Great. Aaron Potch. I don't think he's responding. Aaron, if you were talking, we cannot hear you.
Aaron Fodge, Colorado State University. Can you hear me now?
Yes. You still there, Aaron?
Can you hear me or no?
Yes.
Okay, great. Aaron Fodge, Colorado State University, Transportation Manager. TDM for me is the recruitment and retention of employees, and it's making sure that transportation isn't a reason that an employee or student can't actively participate in our university. Oh, it's making sure there's transportation options that meet each individual and their unique transportation needs.
Great. Garrett.
Hi, I'm Garrett Muma with the State of Colorado Vocational Rehabilitation. I'm what's called an orientation mobility specialist. I specifically work with the visually impaired. And so TDM to me means improving access and efficiency to public transit. And it's obviously a very important aspect of the daily lives of my blind and low vision clients.
Great. Melina.
Hi, everyone. Melita Dempsey, City of Fort Collins. I'm excited because we are starting up and formalizing a TDM program this coming year and developing a plan. And to me, TDM is the implementation of policies and solution to reduce the need to drive alone, whether it's locally or regionally.
Wayne.
Hi, everyone. Wayne Chuang, Air Quality Planner at the Regional Air Quality Council. TDM for me is planning for transportation options that address environmental and social issues associated with how we physically move.
Great. And then Mayor Karsbeck.
Hello, everyone. My name is Will Karsbeck, Mayor of the Town of Berthoud and Chair of the NPO. TDM for me is a consolidation of local and regional travel options into a central user-friendly location.
Great. And then we have.
Hi, I'm Jason Jones with the Greeley Area Chamber, also with Adams Bank and Trust. And sorry, I was a few minutes late here. Got to hear a lot of great ideas there. I think what TDM means to me, if I'm understanding the question correctly, is to me, it's a way that we can partnership across all our communities in order to, in order to move traffic and move people efficiently and effectively.
Awesome. Is there anybody on the call that I missed that would like to introduce themselves?
Hey, Alex, Ann Hutchison joined late. Sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. For me, first, Ann Hutchison, Fort Collins Area Chamber. And for me, TDM is, if we do it right, a business-based solution that helps us to achieve goals that have been set for us by our leaders across the state of Colorado. But business needs to be at the heart. And equally, it's a delivery of promises made when we killed E-Trip.
Yes, and Commissioner Stevens.
Are we doing introductions? I'm sorry, I just came in.
Yes. Name, agency, and then what does TDM mean to you?
Okay. I'm Kristen Stevens, Larimer County Commissioner, and I also serve on the North Front Range NPO and on the statewide advisory commission, something that starts with C. And excuse me, there's people in the background. And what TDM means to me is an opportunity for us to get in control of our greenhouse gas emissions. I think I heard Ann at the end of her comments saying that, because E-Trip was canceled, that we really need to kind of work on this in a voluntary way. And so I think this is an opportunity to do so. And so happy to be participating. Thank you.
Great. Making sure I didn't miss anybody else. Great. And I will jump back into the presentation, hopefully, but okay. Share the screen again. Trying out some new technology, so we'll see how this goes. Great. So I've written down what everybody else has said, and I really appreciate all of the different insights into TDM and what that all means. And so I wanted to frame how we at the MPO see TDM. We see it as a toolbox of strategies to reduce single occupancy vehicles. It is not us or the government or any specific person telling you what to do or what makes sense for you. It's not one size fits all, but it is focused on traveler choice and figuring out what makes sense for you based on your geography, based on what your needs are. What works for Fort Collins won't work for Eaton, and we need to be aware of that and figure out how can we bring the right people to the table to have those conversations. And to what Ann was saying as well, just when we get to what we want to do at the end of this project, is do people see themselves in it and can we implement it? I don't want to waste everyone's time that we're going through all this effort and people don't think that it's something that makes sense for them. So that's how we're framing TDM in this conversation. Is just, it's about choice, it's about toolboxes, strategies, and figuring out what makes sense for individual people and geographies. Some examples of TDM from around the region and around the state, and where you can implement it. The city of Denver requires a TDM plan for specific projects during the development process. And so as you're building new apartments, as you're building new businesses, you look at the transportation system at that point, and that does a better link between land use and transportation. Some examples of what you could plan for are shower facilities so that people can bike when they, or shower after biking to work, like parking, offering transit passes, making sure that your new site connects into the trail system or into the sidewalk network. And at the bottom, I've included some links to these examples. CDOT released a how to create a TDM plan resource a few years ago. And so it's only 2 or 3 pages, but it walks through what that process looks like and what goes into creating small and large TDM plans. During the recruitment process for businesses, there's some tax benefits. So if you offer subsidies or people use transit to get to your office, there are free tax benefits, and there's the potential to expect to Colorado is working on legislation to expand that in the state. And then in terms of what government can do, one example that I know of is that our van poolers get a subsidy if they are commuting into Boulder County. And so that lowers the cost for the individual person, and also means that there are fewer people driving into Boulder County every day. So I'm going to talk for a moment and ask the group if there's any feedback about how, like based on this conversation about TDM so far, and that TDM is a very jargony word, how do we talk to people about this in a way that makes sense to them and we can have real conversations without having to go through all of the introduction that we just went through, I guess is essentially my question. And of course.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I'll jump in very, very quickly. I will say, I would agree that the jargon is confusing. Is it TDM? Is it TMA? Is it TDA? TDO? I do think coming up with a different moniker that as a region we buy into helps with that. But at this point, initials don't help anybody.
Very fair. I unfortunately cannot see who is, if anyone has their hand raised or wants to say something, so please feel free to speak.
Oh, it looks like Aaron Fodge does.
Thank you, Mayor. Go for it.
Well, the first thing I think we can do is we can personalize this term. So instead of the movement of vehicles or buses, TDM is really about the movement of people. So I think the first thing we do is we personalize this acronym that Ann described, because it is a challenge in our field for sure. The first thing to do is to personalize it and talk about how do we make efficiencies in our region to move more people. And that's the starting point for me, is starting a conversation with how do we move more people to the destinations and places they want to go.
This is Will, and I echo both of those. I think it's hard with the acronyms and switching over to make it more personal. I think I would phrase it as a question and just ask whoever I'm talking to, do you use the bus regularly? And I'm guessing their reply would be no. Asking them why, and it might be something to do with hard to access or not enough time, something like that. And then I would just say this is a way to organize all of that and make it easier to use other options to travel than your vehicle.
That seems to be some common advice that we've heard about doing outreach, is having conversations and talking about people's days and what their day-to-day life looks like, because it's easy for us at a transportation agency to say, oh, what about the roads? What about the trails? What about transit? But not everybody thinks about their day like that or makes choices based on that. So I definitely appreciate that advice of talking to people conversationally and being able to say, like, what is the logic that you use to decide what you do every day? I think is what I got from that.
Correct, exactly. Kind of a conversation. And I like your points too. Maybe kind of whoever you're talking to, trying to cater it to their location. Are you trying to get to Fort Collins, Boulder, Denver? Here's the options. Or this is what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, I think what Ann was saying is, maybe sort of have a branding kind of I think this is an opportunity for us to brand it for our community. So looking for, clean commutes or clean and easy commute. I don't know, what might be some options, but I think, maybe having a little help with branding that. I think for the conversations themselves, yes, we need to talk to people about what their daily lives look like. I think that's really important. But I think for for ease of talking about it, it would be good to have a name for it that isn't, having been in the transportation, world for about 3 years. I will say all the acronyms are really confusing to me still, and I'm so grateful that we have a glossary in the front of our meeting packets to help with that. But yeah, something that feels good for our community, I think would be, and it doesn't, feel kind of intimidating in any kind of way, would be a great start.
Perfect. Were there any other comments about this question before we move on?
I have one comment, Alex, and just more on kind of, as we progress and move to the next steps and start speaking to the communities about TDM, I think storytelling is really powerful, and giving different descriptions of what TDM can mean to people. It could mean somebody taking a bus, regionally, and maybe it takes a little bit more time than driving alone. But in the end, they can save money. They can get things done while riding the bus. Maybe that time can be used towards their working. They can telework while on the bus, or just ways people can save money. Like, just really, like, always underscoring the benefits of TDM besides just, of course, there's the environmental benefits, which is why, so many of us are doing this, but, just something that really speaks to individuals.
Just one additional thing too, Alex, if I might. People see through lenses. This people does too, of the things that we work with regularly. And I'm kind of thinking of the original survey that some of the Front Range passenger rail folks put out, a survey, would you like to see passenger rail in Colorado? And they came back with an 86% people said sure. the fact that it's $55 million a mile from Cheyenne to Pueblo wasn't part of that survey. And then we've had the taxing districts and various other things. And the part of the challenge that I find is discerning what biases are present in whatever dialogue we initiate, and just to be aware of that. It's not a matter of changing people's minds, in that way, but as has been pointed out, presenting some of the alternatives, some of the primary reasons, and I appreciate particularly what Aaron was saying. So those are my initial thoughts.
Great. And I didn't say this before, but we are taking notes and this meeting is being recorded, so we can upload the recording at the end and send out the notes. So that way, if any of this conversation is good, or well, hopefully this conversation is good, but if people want to refer back, that we all have the same record to refer back to.
Comments?
No, I'm good. Those were excellent comments. I appreciate it.
I don't see anybody else popping up, so I will move on to the next slide. So the reason that we are doing this is that Director Millette, Suzette, has two goals in her annual goals from Planning Council, both that relate to transportation demand management. The first is developing a regional program, and so that's some of the subset of that is developing strategies and programs to address the needs of the region, providing information, support, and funding to activities, and then working with the Regional Air Quality Council and other interested agencies on the voluntary e-trip program or on similar initiatives if those come out of the state. And the second goal is exploring, advocating for, and providing tools to establish a transportation management organization. I have some slides on this later in the presentation, but the idea would be that the NPO can act as a regional resource, but that there would be these agencies around our region that could do the business outreach and could do the on-the-ground implementation of a TDM program. And as I mentioned before, we do have the Ride NoCo program, which is our rebranded mobility program that focuses on improving mobility for older adults and people with disabilities. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity to partner and work together on those and to take advantage of things that are already happening from the region.
I interject something.
Please.
So this may get a little bit to your questions, Anne, about all these acronyms, these three-letter starting with T acronyms. So TDM is one, and I sort of think of that as the umbrella. That's where we hang a lot of things off of that. We're doing things to manage the demand on the system. Under that umbrella, a TMO, a Transportation Management Organization, or a TMA, they're sort of interchangeable, which is a Transportation Management Association. Those are one of the strategies that we can hang off of that TDM umbrella that would set up a sort of another layer of people that are interested in working on a specific thing within our region. And I know Alex is going to talk about that a little bit more, but I just wanted to help maybe with the acronyms a little bit because there's a lot of them in transportation and we're trying to just keep this, hopefully containable. But just know TMO, TMA is an interchangeable acronym and it's one of those things that you can do under this larger umbrella.
Thank you, Suzette. Looking back at my notes, the other thing that I wanted to highlight about this specific goal is that there are no transportation management organizations in our region. I think there are 8 of them, and all but one of them is in the Denver region. The other one is on I-70 connecting into the Denver region. So I think that's one of the reasons why the NPO is interested in supporting TMOs from the beginning, is that they're a great resource within the Denver region, and bringing that kind of resource and support for businesses and people would be really beneficial. So based on those two goals, We went to planning council with the idea for the work group. So this group, as well as creating an action plan. I don't think we really need to focus a lot on like what kind of things could TDM be. I think that conversation's been like we've had that conversation over time in a lot of different ways. So this is really focusing on what strategies make sense for our region and how can we implement them? Who are the right people to implement them? And even though that this would be an MPO-led plan, the idea would be that different partner agencies could use this and implement things that make sense for them. So, okay, starting off with identifying current needs, programs, and efforts. Like there are a lot of things already happening in our region that are TDM related that we just don't call TDM. I have some examples later, but if there are things that we can take advantage of already or support them or educate other people about them, I think that there's a lot of strength in that. Simultaneously, and what we wanted to talk about today with this context and the purpose is setting a goal and vision. I've done some outreach so far, and one of the questions that came up was, what does success look like for TDM? Like, what exactly are you working toward? So that's something I'm hoping that this work group would be interested in and help with, is figuring out a successful TDM program in Northern Colorado looks like so-and-so. And again, not having that be set by the MPO, but really be a collaborative process.
Anne has a
Oh,
comment.
yes, Anne.
So I'm excited for this action plan conversation, and money should never drive the work we are or are not going to do, but it certainly is a realistic component of what we're able to do. So I'm just curious as far as what kind of funding streams may or may not be available in order for us to dream big.
That is a great question. There are a lot more funding sources that have come out at the state level and at the federal level in the last year or so that could be used for TDM in a lot of different capacities. The first thing that comes to mind is the Multimodal Transportation and Mitigation Options Fund program, MMOF. And the MPO is asking for some of that funding to support the TDM process. Other funding, like I want to say with the new carbon reduction program that's coming out of the federal government, out of the infrastructure and investment.
IIJA, whatever, infrastructure.
Yeah,
something.
the bipartisan infrastructure law that can also be used for TDM. So there are a lot of different funding sources, and that might be a good thing to identify as part of that task one, is not just what currently exists, but what funding opportunities are available and what does that look like. So that's definitely a topic that we can bring back in more depth. Task 3 is identifying partner agencies for ongoing partnership and implementation. I don't see TDM in the region being successful unless it's collaborative, unless people feel represented at the table, they're part of the conversation, they see themselves in a way that it's not just us telling people what to do. And then task 4 is prioritizing projects for funding and implementation. And hopefully this gets at what you were asking, but rather than just say like, oh, it'd be really cool to implement some strategies, actually, here are things that, like concrete things that we can do. Here's funding that could help do that. Here are the agencies that make the most sense to do that. And with grants that come out and other things, we could all point to, we have this regional plan that was adopted by the Planning Council that has the support of these different agencies that were at the table, and do some more grant writing and funding that way, or building support by saying there is this, like these conversations aren't starting from scratch. We already have these conversations and projects identified. And part of that is also figuring out where TMO might make the most sense to host. that we do have an agency that is focused on TDM implementation. Are there any questions about the TDM action plan? That's good, because I have some questions for you about what I just said. So the first question is, do we have the right people at the table to address the tasks that we just talked about? And based on what we talked about with what does TDM mean to everybody in this group, what was planning council direction, and then what was staff's proposal to council to address those goals, are we on the right path for creating a regional TDM program?
Just before you jump into that, I think we've got some comments in chat about the funding. I think Aaron has joined in a couple of things talking about some potential funding sources that you can see in the chat. And for those in the room that can't see this, I was telling you, it's CMAQ funds, which is congestion mitigation air quality money that, for range MPO gets, and then gets distributed back out to our local governments. And there's also a pre-tax commuter benefit. It's for parking, bay and pooling, and transit. So those are the two things that are in chat.
Alex, it's Melina. Have you thought about, so in terms of talking about having the right people at the table, have you thought about when you want to start incorporating like some of, larger employers at the table and in these conversations, especially those that attract regional commutes? Or is the thought that that's kind of next steps once we start having more clarity on where this is going, then start, doing the outreach, targeting these organizations? Just wondering if you've thought about that yet.
That's a great question. Commissioner James from Weld County put us in contact with JBS, and I think they might attend if they're able to, but they might not have been able to attend today. I definitely think that going and having conversations with employers will be a huge part of this. So I guess the answer is both. We have started talking to some large employers. We definitely need to talk to more and to get the word out about this and get more feedback and bring them into the process. I think in terms of the idea of this work group was that we would have this core group of people that meet consistently over the lifetime of this plan, but then we would also have these other stakeholders that we could go out to, or our subject matter experts, or other people that might not need to be in the day-to-day, but have a lot to offer in this conversation. And so I think that's definitely something that we'll figure out as we go, is just who makes sense at the table for that specific conversation, and then who else needs to be brought into that conversation.
And maybe also to piggyback on that is that this is another really good point about having this group. We as MPO staff don't have a lot of contact with businesses. We don't know those people like all of you on this call do. And so to reach out to those businesses and say, hey, a JBS would be great, or whoever would be, a State Farm, or whoever is that right, business to get in contact with. We really need your help on trying to identify who they are and who that person is in those businesses to reach out to. So that's a great point.
Is there any feedback on the tasks? Figuring out basically where are we now, and then what are actionable steps that we can take to implement, to show progress, to build support.
If everybody's happy with it.
I mean, I'm not gonna poke at things that don't need to be poked at. So, okay.
Oh, I just might observe, Alex, that online meetings are great and we want to lean into them, but this work might be really hard to do online versus in a room together in a creative space. So it's just sharing that observation. I'm going to try to stay focused and be a good partner, but if I have to look you in the eye, I'm going to be a better partner.
Definitely fair.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, and I think that's a really good point, and I think we can try to, I mean, I think hybrid meetings are sort of the way to go anymore, so that the people that can make it and want to be in the room and that's available to them, we definitely want to accommodate that, but not everybody can do that.
But we'll definitely keep that in mind, and that might be nice to go to where people, that's the other thing that we've heard a lot during outreach, is going where people are. And if it makes sense to have some of these smaller conversations in people's offices, rather than making people come to us, I think that's also a very fair comment. So if there are no other questions about these questions, then moving on to some of the statewide efforts that are going on. In 2016 and in 2019, CDOT updated their statewide TDM plan. The resource that I talked about before of how to create your own TDM plan came out of this process. They did a lot of data looking throughout the state. One of the other more recent things is that they have created a TDM funding pool within the Office of Innovative Mobility that's focused on developing more transportation management organizations throughout the state. I want to say that Glenwood Springs applied and received some funding to set up a TMO in this most recent call. There's also some innovation grants. CSU and Fort Collins were both successful in applying for those funds, and I have a slide on those in a little bit. I think one of the other wins that we've had, at least in the planning process, is that there's now a transit liaison between Region 4 and the Division of Transit and Rail and the Office of Innovative Mobility, so that we do have another avenue to think about how do we improve our roads and transportation system holistically and thoroughly. On the flip side of that, there's also this mobility services section within the Office of Innovative Mobility that has people focused on statewide TDM strategies, on looking at the transportation system and figuring out how to improve them, and trying to do some of the policy work behind the scenes. And then CDOT, the policy directive?
It's a policy directive.
Policy Directive 1601, which says that if you make major improvements or want to build a new interchange on an interstate highway, the state highway system, you need to consider TDM. And so that rule was passed last year. It's relatively recent, but it is trying to get people to think, if you're going to add an interchange, if you're going to increase car capacity, are you doing things to mitigate that and offer additional options? So those are some of the things that CDOT has happening at the region level and at the state level. I took this slide from a presentation that Medora has given a few times. If you've not heard Medora talk about greenhouse gases, she does a great job of distilling a very difficult topic into something that's very much more understandable. Hopefully she doesn't mind me offering her up for presentations, but she does do a great job. But within the last few years, the state legislature has passed a few bills and done some work on greenhouse gas reductions. So House Bill 1261 proposes to reduce greenhouse gas levels to percentages of 2005 levels. So by 2025, 26% reduction compared to 2005. By 2030, a 50% reduction, and by 2050, a 90% reduction. And that is across a whole number of industries. And so they took those goals and created the greenhouse gas pollution reduction roadmap, which looked at each of those different industries and sectors and figured out, to meet these goals, what do we need to do? And so within the transportation realm, we need to reduce about 7.7 million metric tons of greenhouse gas by 2025, 12.7 million metric tons, and by 2050, 30.5 million metric tons. And I'm sure everybody on this call is much more knowledgeable about that and what that all looks like. The other thing is that as part of Senate Bill 260, the MPO and CDOT now have to consider greenhouse gas emissions reductions in our transportation planning process, in our transportation plan. And so we, Medora's in the process of, and Becky and Suzette, figuring out what exactly that means and how that fits into our existing process. But we do want to show that we are finding programs and putting in the effort to help meet those reduction goals. And I will also say that there is a recording of Medora's presentation about this on our website. And so if anyone is interested, let me know, and I'm happy to send out that recording. I think that there was at least one reference to the employee traffic reduction program, the E-Trip. The idea was that that would encourage businesses and employers to offer options that make it easier for employees to reduce single occupancy vehicle commuting. And the idea, the benefits of it would be that it would improve employee recruitment and retention, help address climate change and ozone pollution. Some of the arguments against it is that this was the stick rather than the carrot for getting businesses to address greenhouse gases. There wasn't a lot of support for businesses to create transportation demand management plans or to offer these. So there was, I think, it came across as unfair burden to businesses to have to take on these mandates. And so E-Trip was rescinded. It did not go through, but that started the conversation for us to have that conversation. How do we create a voluntary program, work with businesses to figure out what they are able to do, what they're able to bring to the table, and then help provide resources to achieve that. Some of the legislation that has come out this year, House Bill 1138 was very similar to E-Trip and would have codified it for employers larger than 100 employees, but it also would have created sustainable funding to create TMOs and to support TMOs over time so that they could help businesses implement E-Trip. And it would have also created a tax credit for offering alternative transportation options. That was postponed indefinitely. I think that there was a lot of confusion, and it was a bill that was trying to do everything all at once. And so there was a lot of holes to poke in it. But there is also House Bill 1026, which is the Alternative Transportation Options Tax Credit. This expands an existing income tax reduction to a tax credit. I am not a tax person. I don't fully understand what the implications of this are, but with things that are happening at the federal level, this would allow businesses to take advantage of state income tax reductions as well. That bill, when we looked yesterday, hasn't been updated since the middle of early February. Yeah, so big TBD on where exactly that stands and what that means, but it is something that the MPO is watching, and hopefully that would be a way to approach businesses to say, hey, did you know about this tax credit? What kind of resources would help figure out how to implement this, or can we help you figure out what this means for implementation?
Hey, Alex. Alex, it's Melina. Can you go back to that one? I just want to comment that the for the second bullet, in terms of the tax credit, I think it would be great, you know, as we do move forward, to be able to explain exactly what that means and how it would apply to an employer and an employee, like a very just like straightforward, simple example, because I think being able to explain it could be really helpful as we continue in the dialogue.
That's a great point. Yes, I'm happy to do that. Some of the other things that are happening in the planning world is that CDOT is working on a 10-year priority list of projects. In the past, it was a planning exercise for if additional funding became available, what are the region's priorities? Where would we put that funding? With the Senate Bill 260 and all the different funding sources that created, it's gone from hypothetical to we actually do have funding. What are we implementing? And so that that's given a lot more, I would say, credence to transit projects in the region and figuring out what how can we invest in that? What are our priorities? And then the NOCO Bike and Ped Collaborative has also been working on creating a 10-year list of bicycle and pedestrian projects around the region. We are also developing our regional transportation plan. And so that'll look at transportation priorities through 2050 as the planning horizon. We are working on our Link NOCO premium transit analysis. I think one of the big questions about TDM is how can you tell people not to drive if they don't have other options, which I think is a very fair question. And so the MPO is leading this planning process to look at how do we connect communities that aren't currently connected by transit that cross the region to provide more options and building on the success of Flex and the Fruiter Express and Mustang. And I mentioned this quickly before, but we also have the Ride NOCO program, which is focused on improving mobility for older adults and people with disabilities. And also, it's not just looking at transit, but it's looking at connecting people to the resources that they need, education, and figuring out how do we improve the systems to benefit people of all ages and abilities. Some of the things that are happening within our region. I mentioned that CSU and Fort Collins were both successful at getting those CDOT TDM funds. CSU will be creating a TDM plan as part of their campus master plan update. Fort Collins is also, I don't want to say creating because you already have TDM policies, but you're stepping up your TDM game and creating a plan and policies and strategies, as well as they received an innovation grant to look at education and resources for the micromobility system that's here. And so that's working with 75 staff members and 75 members of the public and figuring out how can we, or how can the city get more people to ride and use those for first mile, last mile, or for short trips to reduce vehicle trips and also with an eye toward equity. There's also the Shift Your Ride campaign and just the Shift branding overall, which is what are little things that you can do throughout your day to reduce your impact on the transportation system. So can you convert a car trip to to walking, biking, riding the bus, telecommuting? So I think that there's some great, going back to the idea of branding, I think there's some great synergy with that campaign. And I also wanted to highlight that the Fruiter Express that runs between Greeley, Windsor, and Fort Collins has a guaranteed ride home program. And so you can sign up, and if you rode the bus that day, then I think twice a year, if you need to get home before the bus can take you home, or in between when the buses run. You can get a Lyft or Uber ride and be reimbursed for those. And so that way, if there's a family emergency or your kid gets sick and needs to get picked up or whatever the case might be, you're not stuck waiting for the next bus, but you can get a ride home between.
So Melina is reaching out to all of you to see if you would like to shift a job. Potentially go to work for the city of Fort Collins. They're hiring TDM staff.
We need the funding first, but yeah, that's the hope and plan.
Awesome. And so I bring up these statewide and regional contexts because I think we are doing a lot throughout the region. We're just not necessarily calling it TDM, or it's not being brought up in this level of conversation. So I just wanted to highlight that there are a lot of successes, and I think a lot of our local communities and businesses and universities are thinking about these types of things and how to address those concerns. So in addition to this work group, I've also gone out and talked to a few different groups. And these are some of the themes that we've heard so far. I think the thing that's come up the most is that we are not Denver. We don't have the density of Denver. We don't want the density of Denver. We're a pretty disparate region that is growing together, but we have a few large communities and then quite a few small communities, and we need to think of those in ways that make sense for them and not trying to think of we are Denver with 700,000 people, but we as a region are, I think, around 530 to 540,000 people. And so just keeping that in mind. And I alluded to this earlier, that we need to lead with the carrot and not the stick. So we need to work with businesses, not tell them what to do, but bring them to the table and figure out what resources would be helpful and figure out how we can all work together on that. The third bullet is a lot of, I can't not drive my own car because, and I think it's, if you're asking people to make a big change, it's, but my kid, I need to pick my kid up from school and I need to do this and I need to do this. And then after work, I need to do this, or I don't work a regular 8 to 5 shift. So riding transit doesn't make sense to me. And I think that's definitely something that we need to address, is that not everybody works an 8 to 5 in a way that, oh, I could walk to the bus, get on the bus, it takes me to the office. But there are a lot of reasons that that doesn't make sense, or things that we might want to tweak to make those more successful. And I also mentioned this before, but we need to figure out what exactly a successful TDM program looks like and how we can get the buy-in to actually implement it. So I would say that those are the big things that we've heard so far. I think it's pretty nice that we've heard similar, like in hearing what TDM means to each person. I think there was some consistency with these themes, but I just thought that it would be helpful to show what these conversations have looked like so far. And so I will pause.
I got to dip out for this other meeting, but this is fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay. So I mentioned that there are a lot of TDM efforts within the region. So I just wanted to pause and ask if the group knew of other TDM strategies or resources in the region that we should be aware of and potentially build on.
I would also just want to acknowledge that Commissioner James from Weld County has joined us. I know he was going to join us late, but he is also here with us. So I did want to recognize that we added a participant, even though we lost a participant.
Welcome, Commissioner James.
Thank you, sir.
So are there any strategies that people on the phone are aware of that we should be aware of, that we should highlight, or that we should follow up with people on? Okay.
You know, are you just looking for kind of general programs that aren't officially like TMOs or TMAs kind of? Because I mean, I know CSU, Aaron Fodge can probably speak to a lot of what CSU is doing in the space. Sorry to put him on the spot, but
He's typing like crazy in chat.
I actually have to go to another meeting, but to talk transit. But yeah, I was going to mention one regional thing is certainly the NOCO Bike Ped group that the NPO manages. You know, being able to provide trail infrastructure that connects our cities together that support commuters, I think is one that we should be capturing in this effort. I put in there earlier the pre-tax commuter benefits. Certainly, I think there's a role for the business community if they haven't engaged with pre-tax commuter benefits. That there's, it's something that you can offer. It's, it's basically as similar to your flexible spending accounts, where employees can put away pre-tax dollars, lower their taxable income, and put those funds towards the NPO's van pool program or transit passes, or they now have a program for bikes where you can get some funds reimbursed if you have expenses related to biking. And then, of course, some communities have taken advantage of the parking side of that as well. So, I mean, there's a lot that we do. We are coming at it from an employer perspective, of course. But each of your municipalities has a role, and I think it was mentioned earlier, in having established relationships with businesses to make sure that our population is mobile and they have access to these businesses, so we're not in a position where we're sending our employment workforce out of the region to work. We want to keep people mobile here. And so, that's where I come back to my point earlier about, TDM is really about the movement of people and striving to find efficiencies to move more people through an existing roadway, transit, of course, so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, I would say the university's put a pretty large investment in it, and at least three FTEs plus, a lot of grassroots efforts to make sure we're recruiting and retaining the best employees, because we don't want transportation to be the reason that we lose someone. And the costs of transportation in northern Colorado are real. And if you pair that with the cost of housing, we know on average the typical person in northern Colorado is paying half of their income to their rent and to their mortgage or to transportation. So, I mean, that's a fact. So there's an investment to be made by businesses for sure. But I do have to hop off and go to our next one. So I appreciate being invited. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. So I wanted to just piggyback on something that Aaron was saying, and we had this conversation a little bit earlier in the NPO office, and that is, I've been hearing a lot about businesses and commuting for businesses, but that's not the only place that we can affect transportation demand management. I don't know if any of you have been around schools at the time school is coming into session or going out of session. So I think the other thing I'd like this group to think about is like just broaden our horizons a little bit, because while the commute to work is important, there's other things that we need to be thinking about as well. And we have Garrett has a question. Whoa. Garrett and Melina are on it here. So Garrett is saying, is paratransit a part of this conversation or other rural transit options via 60+ ride in Will County? Just thinking outside the fixed route paradigm, just thinking of folks who not only can't drive, but can't access fixed routes for various reasons.
That's a great question. And I think that one of the things that we at the NPO are trying to do better at is look at the system holistically and try to look at all abilities, geographies, what's available. And I think that there's some great partnership that could happen with the Ride No Go program and what the mobility committees are doing. So I think, yes, I don't know how much it'll be part of the conversation specifically called out, but I think that acknowledging that not everybody can just ride a fixed route bus is an important part of the conversation.
Of course.
I think when responding to this question, I think maybe it may not be a bad idea to have, you did a good job representing the type of regional and local initiatives underway for TDM. It may be valuable to the group to bring those groups in to give, a 5-10 minute conversation as part of these meetings to kind of give more hands-on information about these different programs and tools to maybe help increase our shared understanding.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And I think that that's one of the things that we're thinking about with those subject matter experts, and how do we bring people that are doing the groundwork in so that they're aware of what's happening, but also have that sharing of information.
And then Melina has a comment in chat. This is TDM and TIP policies, prioritizing, giving greater weight to infrastructure / projects that support clean mobility options like transit. As someone said earlier, you need the infrastructure if you want people to have other options that can compete with driving alone.
For people that don't know, the TIP is the Transportation Improvement Program. And so those are the federal and regionally significant state and local funds that the MPO and CDOT handle, or the local communities handle. And for a call for projects, I know that TDM is competitive. I don't know if we have anything in our general call for projects specifically calling out TDM, but I think that's something that we could.
Alex, I don't mean like what I actually mean is, we got to kind of turn the paradigm, shift this paradigm and give greater weight towards clean mobility, sustainable transportation options. We need the infrastructure in place, transit, biking, walking, etc., to actually expect people to make that change from driving alone to using these other options. That's all I mean by that.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. Are there any other thoughts on this topic? You guys are helping set the agenda for the next meeting. A lot of things to look up and come back to talk about, so definitely appreciate it. So we've talked a little bit about TMOs in different capacities, but in addition to going out to different communities and different groups in our region, I've also been reaching out to different TMOs in the Denver region to figure out what does their structure look like, what does their funding look like, what might make sense for our region up here. And so I took this map from the CDOT TDM plan, and I've highlighted 3 different Denver area TMOs. So Denver South is part of an economic development agency. You can see them in the green at the very bottom of the screen. And they receive sales tax within a certain mile, a certain distance of the I-25 area. And they are a sister agency to the Economic Development Agency, but they are separate. So they can't do any of the, I don't think that they can take a stance on elected officials, but they've done a lot for working on intersection improvements, sidewalks, shuttles, that first mile, last mile concern. And so they have a dedicated funding source in addition to what they get from the Dr. Cog MPO. But I thought that they were a really interesting example of kind of a very focused TMO in terms of geography and what they're able to do. The I-70 coalition is obviously located on I-70, just a little bit outside of this map. And they were formed by concerned local governments that FHWA was making decisions and they weren't at the table. And so they have one dedicated staff person. Federal Highway Administration. was like, oh God, did I say it wrong? Federal Highway Administration. That they were making a decision on what to do with that highway, and the local governments didn't feel like they had enough of a say. And so they formed this coalition. They have a website that explains all of the different options that you can take when you are going up there to not drive by yourself. They are investing a lot in carpooling apps. They do a lot of education campaigns. They do a lot of outreach to businesses. And they are funded through membership dues and from the businesses and from the local communities. And then there's also Transportation Solutions, which is this area, the Glendale, Cherry Creek area. And they were formed by developers. And so one of the big things that they do is that they help with TDM plans within the city of Denver and figuring out how do we implement the requirements from the city to do the developments we want to do. So they are much more developer focused. And so the reason I wanted to highlight these three is that they're each three very different types of agency, three different types of funding, three different geographies, but they're all working toward additional resources and options and working with businesses. To the point that Ann brought up, they're not, some I-70 Coalition is kind of government focused, but it's a separate agency. All of these are groups of people coming together to address the issues that they see with the transportation system that are funded with some Dr. Cog funds, but overall they have their own missions, their own geographies, and they can set their purpose. So getting back to what we were talking about in Suzette's goal of looking at where exactly is, or how do we implement a TMO in our region? NPO staff is asked to set aside some of those multimodal transportation and mitigation options fund dollars to help start a TMO for the first 2 years. We'd also be interested in applying for some of those CDOT TDM funds. We did find out that those are not MMOF funds, so we could use those as match, which would be really helpful. And then also figuring out how the MPO can work with this potential TMO or TMOs to create regional resources, find those partnerships, and figure out where these most make sense. And if there's interest in creating more TMOs in the future, people don't have to start from scratch. One of the things I was very impressed with all of the TMOs that I've talked to so far is that they are very supportive. As soon as I mentioned what the MPO, what our region is looking at, they all were very happy to set aside half an hour to an hour and walk through all of these different things, all of my different questions. So I think there's a lot of great resources that we can bring up here and really support businesses and people figuring out what their options are.
So I'm going to add a little bit onto, so we're talking just slightly a bit about funding here. So I want to make sure that people are understanding some of these funding concepts. We're not talking about ongoing support for a TDM or a TMO. I think the slide is really talking about some seed money to get it up and operational. That's the intent of the set aside. And I know that these are, maybe for some of you, all these, again, here we go with the acronyms and the mumbo jumbo, right? But the MMOF funds typically come with a 50% match. So if you want 50,000, you have to come up with another 50,000. And so what Alex was saying with that second bullet on the CDOT TDM, Colorado Department of Transportation has another fund that they're using for TDM support, and that could be used as a 50% match. So now you don't, if you're coming up trying to get some seed money to start a TMO, you can now get the $100,000 and you're not anything out of pocket, so to speak. Now, again, remember, it's seed money. It's not something that's ongoing. So I think that's just planting some ideas of how to get this, maybe a TMO up and operational.
And also building off of that, this aligns with what Dr. Cog does, where they provide 2 years of seed funding, and then a new TMO is expected to figure out how to fund their third year. And then for the fourth year and beyond, they are then allowed to apply for MPO funds or Dr. Cog funds. And that's a bigger conversation down the road about MPO fund, like future MPO funds. But that idea would be that we could help plant the seed for the first few years, allow them to like build their purpose and partnerships and relationships, and then come back and figure out how to keep that funding going. I see a hand raised.
Yeah, Alex, hi, Melina again. So Dr. Cog, their Way to Go program, which is their regional TDM program, they had a annual funding stream to TMOs of $80,000. Or is that something that our NPO could consider down the line? Because it is, I mean, that doesn't completely support the operations of a TMO, but it is a steady stream of money that they can depend on, and they, you know, have to adhere, you know, there is a regional partnership and cooperation and adhere to certain things in order to receive that funding. So just wanted to put that out there.
I will very quickly punt that over to Suzette.
So, you know, that's a good question. And I think, I don't know all the nuances of the Dr. Cog, how they apply for the money, but the money that they do distribute is CMAQ money, which is that congestion mitigation and air quality money, which is federal money. And that federal money does come with strings in that you need to show an air quality benefit to what you're doing. So I think that that's part of the discussion. We have 2 of our NPO council members on the call. I think, you know, we could bring that to the council and have that discussion and see what they think. But just on the face of it, if you're applying for a project that has an air quality benefit that is going to an organization that can actually receive that money, then I would say it's an eligible project that should be evaluated. And I don't know, commissioners, if you have any other input on that. Commissioner Stevens, you're muted.
Okay. I'm having a lot of Zoom troubles lately. Yeah, I think that's certainly something we can consider, you know, I mean, as part of our, you know, the work that we do and the funding that we do. So you know, it's not out of the realm of possibility, just because we haven't done it, but we also haven't had any proposals come in like that. So, you know, I think that, you know, there again, we're all like looking to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. Is there any talk of any programming like this being part of mitigation measures? You know, when we're looking at different kind of mitigation measures for greenhouse gas reduction, I mean, is this one of the tools that can get points, so to speak, in for projects?
Yes. So it's any, and so what you're referring to is the mitigation measures that will help us in our planning process to meet that greenhouse gas reduction target that we're being set. And so anything that, in my opinion, shows that we're reducing emissions, I think is something that's going to help us meet that mitigation measure for sure.
So in thinking about that, if there's proof that, you know, a specific TMO or TMA does, you know, can reduce a lot of emissions, I think that certainly would even make the case further that we would be interested in funding something like that, because it could be something that we use to mitigate other projects potentially. So yeah, I would certainly think that there'd be consideration of funding a program like that. And I mean, we could fund that under MMOF, or, I mean, you know, I think that there's numerous ways to be able to fund that.
Yeah, and I think as Alex mentioned earlier, there's a lot more funding sources coming online that we did not have in the past. So there's the Senate Bill 260 at the state level, new things coming out of the IIJA, and I don't know what that acronym stands for, but that's a federal transportation bill. So there are more funding sources coming in that direction.
Yeah, so I would say we're open to it for sure. At least I am. Can't speak for the whole council, but I certainly would be interested in seeing you know, proposals come forward.
And just to chime in, this is why I've been so proactively a proponent of developing just this kind of an organization because I believe this to be a harvester of the low-hanging fruit per se. And it most definitively should be considered as a greenhouse gas mitigation measure. We'll see how those come out of the TC here in the coming months, but I would be a strong advocate for just this type of organization being considered as a mitigation measure, and the reason that I'm such a fan of doing this because I believe there is opportunity out there. At least in my conversations with Suzette and MPO members and members from the Upper Front Range TPR as well, that we need to look at carrots, not sticks, and we need to look at ways that we can harvest the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and this type of organization, I believe, would be just that. So thanks, Alex, for all your work on it. Yeah, I'm quite open-minded to it.
Great. So, one of the last questions that I wanted to ask is just, are there concerns about moving forward with TDM or implementing it in the region? I think we've had a lot of great conversation about what funding sources does this count, or how exactly could we measure this for greenhouse gas mitigation? I think there's a few other things that we can look into and then come back at our next meeting of this group. But I was just curious if there's other questions or concerns that people on the call would want to bring up.
We do have a hand raised. Derek?
Derek.
Thank you. This is more of a question than anything. The conversations I've had with, at least locally in Fort Collins, with transport director, that transit's down 66% from 2019, and it's actually even down from 2021's down from 2020, and the projection is probably 4 to 5 years to be able to get back to original ridership. And and that's more of a kind of nationwide projection of getting back to original ridership. So it's more of a question about timing on establishing a TDM and really understanding that the ridership's down so much. Does that pose challenges to the establishment of a TDM, especially in our region where most of the ridership, there's not a lot of transit dependent, where other regions, you have a lot of transit dependence. So it's more of a question of timing and how do you bridge that gap between the next few years just to get the ridership back up to its original ridership. And I know transit's only one piece of this, but just wanted to share that observation.
Rick, I think that's a really good point. We've heard that same kind of a conversation coming out of RTD in Denver about the ridership is down and we don't really know when it's coming back. In the North Front Range NPO organization, we operate VanGo, which is our van service between northern Colorado down into Denver predominantly. And I will tell you, and this is the good and the bad, I guess, of raised gas prices, that with the gas prices have going up like they did here lately, we've seen a lot more people interested in riding the vans again. And I know, some of that is dependent on the employer saying, yeah, you can now come back into the office. But it is also, I think it's a financial decision for some people about, now that gas is almost $4 a gallon. In some places it's $7 a gallon. Really where's my money going? And I think that is starting to drive some people's decisions.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's one of the reasons why I'd like to start the planning now and think about things like that. We've seen that things can change very quickly in either direction. So I don't want to put off the conversation and not be ready for an upswing, but I also understand we don't want to be funding things that aren't really the best use of funding at the moment. And so I hope that is something that we can talk about further in this group of the different strategies we can come up with, of the different groups that make the most sense to have at the table. what makes sense with funding that's available and the benefit that we could get out of that.
Yeah, and I think the other piece is that the last time I looked at the website, the federal COVID mandates for masking and all that are being lifted. I think it's April 18th is when those are due to be lifted as well. So, but it doesn't mean that people are now comfortable getting back on a transit bus. So I think that's really where it's at. And Garrett has some more comments on here. Garrett, did you want to go into that a little bit further?
Oh, I was just saying, besides, my big thing is, getting access to transit for folks with disabilities or in rural, and I'll keep on pounding on that. If in regards to greenhouse gas mitigation, I was just curious if we have any numbers for our region as far as how many buses are there yet to go to convert to cleaner energy buses. About right before the pandemic, I attended a meeting in Fort Collins about our plan, as I can't remember if it was a city or a county, but it was here in Fort Collins, but about how we were going to try to meet these targets about cleaner energy, greenhouse mitigation. And I remember asking this question, and at that time I couldn't get like specific numbers. Now it's a few years later, and I wonder, I think it would be good to have that kind of information. How close are we in cleaner energy buses, mass transit? How far are we to doing this?
I'm thinking that maybe one of the topics that we can talk about next month or at the next meeting is we were talking about what funding could be available for TDM programming, but maybe one of the other things we can do is what has the MPO region funded, because Transport has been pretty successful in applying for funding for their electric buses. They just got their first 2 delivered last month, and they're doing the testing for that. And I think that they have enough funding for 10 electric buses overall. Greeley just finished replacing all of their smaller buses with, I think it's compressed natural gas, larger buses. And then Loveland has also been working through updating their buses. And I think Loveland's focus is more on the asset management than necessarily converting fuel types, but that it might be interesting to tie together what funding is available and where has funding in the region gone toward TDM-like projects.
Yeah, and I think we're talking, there's 2 things that I think are coming up in our conversations here. One is we're talking about transportation demand management and sort of what's out there and how can people use the system or the programs that we're talking about. And the other side is the air quality benefit side. So I think, there's those 2 pieces that I think we're talking about in these discussions. So the air quality side of things is, and I'll just use as electric vehicles as an example. You can swap out all of the internal combustion engines and have all electric vehicles on the road tomorrow, but that doesn't do anything for congestion or managing the demand on the system. It does a lot for air quality, but it doesn't do anything for the demand on the system. So I think as we're talking about both of these things, I'm just raising that so that we're all aware of that as we're going through this conversation.
Thank you. That makes perfect sense. And I guess I would just add to that, and I know it's a cliche, but you don't know what you don't know, and you need targets. And it's like, and I think it would just be good information to know how far we are along in that goal. It's kind of also, and I'm glad you were there, that there's the kind of the diverging 2 kind of factors. I think also a part of this conversation is, the efficiency, and I'm sure each transit system is looking at this, whether it's GET in Greeley or Transport in Fort Collins. But as far as efficiency, as far as are you getting the buses to the most amount of people and not running empty buses, because that's a waste of energy and contributes to, pollution. But at the same time, balancing that with, you don't want to leave people out there who need it hanging. So obviously it's a complex situation, but I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, and that segues really well to the second question I have for the group is, how do we define success for TDM in the region? I think that this will be an overarching question at our next few meetings, but just after this initial conversation and presentation, I'm curious of how this group might start thinking about success or what to measure or, yeah.
I mean, I guess for me, it would be nice to have some measurable goals. And I don't know what those look like, but, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, or, seeing, changes in, seeing that these changes in behavior really would affect some of the, some of our ozone conditions, some of our greenhouse gas emissions. I don't know. I think, maybe some, polling, because I mean, it can improve quality of life if you're not stuck in traffic all day too. So there may be some added benefits just to folks who don't want to be in that rat race piece. But yeah, I mean, I'd be open to, what success looks like, but I do think we need some measurable goals that we can, I think that'll encourage others to participate as well, so.
It looks like Melina is agreeing with you in the chat. She's also saying we need something that's measurable. So greater percent of people using transit, biking, walking, teleworking, et cetera, reduce VMT, reduction in percent of people driving alone.
And I guess that's where we need some baseline information as far as, and I'm sure it's out there, and I know we sometimes always our eyes glaze over at too much data, but as far as seeing where we're at, where we've been at, where we're at now, and where we want to go as far as what's ridership right now, is it increasing? Did we see any trends, why it increased or why it decreased? Because that can help us, oh, maybe this contributed to that. Well, what if we did this? So we need baseline data to go along with, to shoot for those goals and getting people to walk, bike, bus, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I don't know what the schedule is, but CDOT will be doing their statewide travel model or household survey, which the last time we had a household survey done, it was 2009. So our data is pandemic and financial collapse away from where we are right now. So yeah, trying to figure out what our baseline is, I think would be great.
I also think it would be important to kind of keep expectations realistic, and we can't get to a fully multimodal system overnight where anyone can walk, bike, or take transit wherever they need to go. But I think, how do we start shifting that mindset in those conversations and policies so that we're on a road to get there 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line?
And I think that that's a good point, and something that's come up in the premium transit analysis a lot is we can't go from 0 to 60 really quick. We need to figure out how to phase things and what makes sense and what's available, and not necessarily always go down the path of least resistance, but we can't expect to change everything overnight, but we need to make those investments over time and make those gradual changes.
Mr. James has a hand raised.
Mr. James.
I know it's unlike me to raise my hand. I didn't mean to surprise you there, Alex. I guess my comments are not surprisingly a bit more Machiavellian in nature. Are we keeping the state off our back? Are we keeping this in the in the realm of the carrot and not the stick? Are we making sure that our businesses are not regulated? I mean, there's a success to be measured in greenhouse gas mitigation, yes, but I think the more that we can be the masters of our own destiny, so to speak, and plan these things out to where the folks, the regulators are happy and our businesses can continue to thrive. I think that is a measure of success in ourselves, to show a proactive nature in our region for endeavoring to put together this type of organization to exact a greenhouse gas reduction, but most specifically to continue to keep this in a voluntary, proactive way rather than a regulated, reactive way. I think that's a definitive measure of success.
Definitely, and I think that that's been my guiding light to this point is what makes sense for our region and how do we define success for ourselves, not like and make sure that we can show that we are making progress. Any other comments about defining success? Okay, my last question is there any general feedback about TDM or this conversation or anything that people would like to bring up?
Everybody's silent.
Okay.
Or they're on mute.
Right. So my last slide, I believe, yes, is the next steps for this group. As I mentioned, we're taking notes and we'll post the recording to the website and send both of those out to everybody on this phone call. We definitely want to do more outreach and discussion. I think that that ties into what we talked about of having those conversations and talking to people where they are. So if there's anybody who would like me to come and give a presentation or come and discuss with different committees or existing meetings, please let me know. And then the question for the group is about setting up the next meeting. As I mentioned, I think future topics for this next meeting is looking at those existing conditions, goals, vision, taking everything that we learned today. I can come back and give some quick overview about different funding sources that will be available, and then also with our existing funding sources, what have we funded? And then also maybe I can work with Medora about how we might be able to quantify some air quality benefits through a TDM program and show that success. So I'm proposing that we meet in maybe late April, early May, to give me enough time to prepare this information and be able to give actual like a good presentation and discussion. So does that sound like a good plan to people in the group?
Absolutely. Sounds good.
And I can send out a doodle poll. It sounds like Thursdays or Fridays might work better for people. I have a personal mission to never schedule a meeting after noon on Fridays, but I'm just gonna.
It just depends on where you schedule that.
That's something, right? Yeah. But if there's no concerns about that, then I will send out a doodle poll for late April, early May.
May I ask, I'm gonna throw something out like spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks and what doesn't, and this happens to be this gentleman in the room and Ann Hutchison on the call as well. I'm wondering if, trying to Ann's conversation about trying to get more people in the room, would it make sense to maybe have the chambers host, here in Fort Collins and then maybe in Greeley, and then, the people that are close to that geographically are a little more able to attend? I mean, I'm just throwing that out there. If you say no, it's fine. And I don't know what the people on the call think, if you think that that's a good idea or not.
From the perspective of Greeley, yeah, we'd love to welcome you to Greeley, and we have space to do that. I think it would help with conversation flow, and as we all know, there's so many conversations that happen around the table, but there's conversations that happen as we convene and thoughts and people begin to brainstorm. So I think that's really important to what we're doing here. So I would support that, and I think it's a great idea. I also like having a hybrid option because there's some folks that wouldn't have been able to be here in person, without it. So maybe a hybrid to begin with, and then, maybe we move to just maybe all in person. That's my perspective. I'll let Ann, answer from, Fort Collins' perspective.
Yeah, we would most certainly like to host conversations. I would want to redirect it. While today's insights were valuable and great, I'm anxious that 90% of my business friends would tune out and say, you're just trying to beat me down into submission. And I don't think that was your intent today, but nonetheless, I think we'd want to make sure we frame the conversations in a way that they can buy in, feel some ownership, be a part of a solution. Yes, we would be more than happy to host, but I would want to help to create a space for success.
And ditto to what Ann said, Loveland would be happy to host a session in our chamber offices in our conference room.
Awesome. Great.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, and I will take any insight about how to have this conversation in a more appropriate fashion. Obviously, this was framed around what the MPO sees, but talking about what resources would be helpful, asking them what success would look like, figuring out what those landmines could be that would scare people from participating. I think that we can definitely shift a conversation to be helpful to this conversation, but also be contextualized to the people at the table. So that's all that I had scheduled for today's meeting.
I don't think you were being for much. Okay.
Are there any questions or final comments? Very efficient group. And you have enough time to prepare for your meeting.
I know.
Let's see.
Awesome.
Well, thank you, everybody. This was a great meeting, great insight, and happy to follow up with our next meeting.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work you put in.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh, no.